Kirik is the first fire ruler introduced in Rhea cluster. He originally came out in the starter deck at the beginning of the cluster and received an upgrade 3 sets later. His original printing and support was okay, but nothing compared to the other viable rulers at the time. Now he's arguably one of the strongest decks in the game and is the undisputed fire ruler in New Frontiers. Kirik has a lot of gimmicks that let him get around problems that fire typically has in the meta. Mr. Lizardman and his support use a secondary resource called strength counters that can be spent to cast certain spells or activate certain effects, which all tend to be very above curve for their cost. Kirik's cards are generally abysmal in other decks due to their lack of strength counters, but meta-defining when run with their designated ruler. Kirik has a 3-cost judgment, rather cheap and affordable for what he does, and he also has a variety of other effects. At the beginning of the game, you put 10 strength counters on him. If you ever run low or out of strength counters, you can also rest him to add X counters to him, where X is equal to 10 minus the current numbers of counters he has. To kind of put this in perspective, if Kirik has 2 counters and you rest to refuel him, you would gain 8, since 10 minus 2 is 8. Kirik can also spend 2 strength counters to look at the top 5 cards of his main deck, and add a battle art chant from those cards to his hand. The rest of the cards then go to the bottom of the deck in whatever order you want. You can only use this effect once per turn, and only during your turn. This ability is a large part of why Kirik is much stronger than your average fire ruler. Fire is an aggressive typing. It tends to run through its resources rather quickly. It lacks draw power and search power, and has generally bad recovery options. Many of Kirik's battle arts are helpful and bypass these weaknesses, and getting an extra draw for 2 counters is a pretty good trade-off. Kirik can add an extra total of 5 cards to his hand before having to refuel, assuming you don't spend your counters on anything else. There are some things to keep in mind when using this ability. Mainly, be careful when you choose to scry for a battle art. If you have a handful of 7 cards and then search, you'll have to discard a card at the end of the turn by rules process to stay at 7. Also, if you happen to have other cards you plan to play that you can draw or search with, it's better to hold off on going for your battle art until after using those. Even if it's only by 1 card, you'll have a higher success rate of grabbing what you need out of a deck of 34 cards than you would out of a deck of 35. Post-Judgment, Kirik becomes a 12-10 body with precision. When he enters the field, he gains counters equal to 15 minus the current amount of counters on him when the effect resolves. Kirik can spend 5 strength counters to deal 500 damage to a J Resonator, and he also has a God's Art ability that costs 1 Firewall and 7 strength counters. With it, he gains 1000 attack and defense until the end of the turn, and also looks at the top 7 cards of his deck to put a dragon from among them into the field. All other cards revealed by this effect are then sent to the grave. Kirik loses the ability to gain counters while on his J-Ruler side, so you typically only flip when you plan to close out a game. His first active effect lets him clear boards of bodies for his Resonators to swing through, and his God's Art sets up to either pull out a potentially big dragon and put it onto the field, or for Kirik himself to swing in for game with an oppressive 2200 attack. If you fail to end a game with Kirik the turn you flip or the turn after, you'll probably feel the blowback from casting Judgment. The core for most Kirik decks is pretty unchangeable. He has a good handful of cards that he absolutely needs to operate at full power, and oftentimes makes it hard to experiment or tweak the deck. He has 3 staple Resonators that all should be run at 3 to 4 copies each, with very little room for negotiation. The first is Hoel Pig, a 1-cost Fire Beast Resonator that has 400 attack, 300 defense, and can banish itself to recover its owner's ruler. This card is exceptionally important for Kirik because it lets him call a stone and refill his counters without having to fall behind on the resource curve. It also lets him call a stone and then Judgment in the same turn as well. Pig's older sibling, Piggy, is a 2-cost Fire Beast Resonator with 500 attack and 700 defense. Piggy adds 2 strength counters to your ruler when he enters the field, and can remove 2 strength counters from your ruler to give a Resonator either swiftness or flying until the end of the turn. Flying and swiftness are pretty damn strong as far as symbol skills go. Hell, the one ruler in the game with an effect similar to this was banned in part for providing these types of benefits. Piggy lets most of Kirik's Resonator base get over blockers to creep in damage, or make strong, slower bodies fast enough to get in a hit before they are inevitably removed. Being able to fuel one of these effects for free with his enter is also a nice bonus. His defense is slightly above curve for a 2-cost, so in general most decks will find it hard to remove Piggy without an actual hard removal option or ability. The last of the staple Resonators is Pialael, the Flaming Fist, a 2-cost 5/5 Dragonoid Resonator that puts 2 strength counters on your ruler when she enters the field. She can remove 1 strength counter from your ruler to gain a 2/2 boost until the end of the turn, and may use this ability twice per turn. She also has a 3-cost Awakening that searches out a piggy from the deck and puts it into the field. Piale is, without a doubt, one of the strongest 2-cost resonators in the game. She's almost always a 9/9 while being played with Kirik, and can search out Piggy by the time mid-game rolls around. Between her and Piggy, that's 1400 damage, which is pretty decent for turn 5. She also has a very strong Battle Art chant, but we'll get into that a little bit later. While Kirik has plenty of other really strong resonators in his archetype, I wouldn't call them staples. Honestly, one of the biggest problems for Kirik is that he has too many good cards to just say, yeah, throw this into every deck. It's certainly not a bad problem, though. Kirik's playstyle is malleable because of the variety in tech choices he has. It's part of the reason he's a strong ruler. The biggest issue behind having so much support is that the obvious pack filler cards and otherwise weaker support options stick out like a sore thumb. Kirik is split between 3 archetypes: Dragonoids, Dragons, and Beasts, with only a few select options out of the Dragonoids and Beasts being worth it. Hell, the next best Beast card after the Pigs aren't even in Kirik's cluster support, and are benefits he gets for running a gimmicky dual will source or from the new Valhalla cluster cards that just indirectly support him. Let's move on to the battle arts. These are a line of chants that are made to work specifically with Kirik. They all require either strength counters to cast or to activate extra effects. Most of them are very cheap and powerful. Most Kirik main boards are going to run anywhere from 8 to 12 of these things. If you have 8 battle arts in a 40 card deck, you're statistically guaranteed at least 1 each time you use Kirik's search ability. It's really hard to say what battle arts are and aren't staples because there's just so many good ones, and there are plenty of decent situational ones. There is one card that deserves to be run at 4 copies each in every deck no matter what though, and that's Heaven's Sundering Dragon Palm. For 1 Fire Will, you can either burn your opponent for 400 damage, deal 500 damage to a Resonator, or destroy a dragon on the field. If you pay an additional 5 strength counters when you cast the card, you can choose to do an additional effect. This card gives a wide range of options and is the cheapest cost to damage ratio on a burn spell. You can do a total of 900 damage for 1 will. Even if it's split between 2 targets, that's still doing the work of 2 spells for the price of 1. The Dragon Destruction effect also doesn't specify Resonator, so you can destroy a J-Ruler too. Cards like Maiden Viola require that there be a target to transform into a dragon, so in the right scenario you could potentially kill a J-Ruler for 1 off a misplay. Hell, this is actually a decent strategy in Wanderer format where you have access to dual stones that let you run fire and wind simultaneously. There is one other required battle art in my opinion, which is Ground and Air Supremacy. For 1 Fire Will and 5 strength counters, you can either search out a Piale from your deck and put it into the field, or deal 1000 damage to a J Resonator if you already control a Piale. This is one of the most cost-efficient search cards in the game. For 1 will, you get a 2-cost creature that can potentially become a 9/9 on your next turn. The 5-cost counter investment is also offset a bit since Piale adds 2 counters when she enters the field. The card is also not quick cast, so the amount of things that can cancel it turn 1 are very specific and limited. The 1000 damage is nothing to scoff at either. 1k is enough to kill just about anything that's 3 cost or less. Hell, it even kills most 4-drops and J-Rulers. Run this at 4. It makes Piale a 1-cost Resonator, thins your deck by 1, and can be a potentially devastating removal spell in the mid-game. High Speed and Play Dead are the last of what I would call the main deck battle arts. Both of these are very strong, and I'd typically go for one or the other if you're not doing a pure fire build. High Speed gives a stat boost in swiftness to a Resonator until the end of the turn, but its real value comes from the fact it can become a burn spell if you remove 4 strength counters. It also has Remnant, so you can cast it again from your grave. In total, you can burn your opponent for an additional 800 damage off of 1 High Speed. High Speed also doesn't specify its target has to be a Resonator you own, so if you only need the 400 burn to close out a game but have no field, you can target your opponent's Resonators for the boost as well. Play Dead works better when you expect your opponent to be running a lot of removal, and you also have a lot of enter effects to abuse with it. Play Dead makes it so Piale and Piggy remain threats even if your opponent successfully killed them once. And you can also bring back Coel Pig if you use its ability to recover your ruler. Kirik's Resonator base and support lack protection, so Play Dead is a staple in formats where board wipes and field destruction are rampant. I tend to gravitate more towards High Speed because I like the extra reach you can get from it with the burn. With 4 Dragon Palms and 3 High Speeds, you actually have enough to kill your opponent off of just burn damage alone. Most of Kirik's other battle arts fall into either side deck material or please don't run this. The side deck cards are labeled the way they are because they're mostly responses to very specific matchups. Cross Counter specifically helps with things like Gil or Ayu, who can dish out lethal damage with relative ease. Flying Drill helps against decks with flyers, and works great with Piggy since he can give your opponent's Resonators flying for cheap targeted removal. This was actually one of my favorite options in the past New Frontiers format, since you could get rid of big problems with it rather quickly. Like with Supremacy, not much can survive a 1k burn to the face. Power Spike and Firebird are a bit more situational. Spike is a decent burn spell if you find yourself against a deck with a lot of field disruption but not a lot of hand disruption. And Firebird is mostly useful in metas where counter cards, quick cast effects, and active abilities are strong. Firebird was a sorely underused card in Sherry format. It could remove problem resonators like Puppet Maker or Shade before your opponent could take advantage of their effects. There is one sort of honorary battle art though, the Pathway part. A 2-cost red-blue chant that reduces its cost by 1 water if your ruler is Kirik, or 1 fire if your ruler is Shayla. You can do one of two things. Either 600 damage to a J resonator, or return target resonator to its owner's hand. 600 damage on a 1-cost spell is insane, and makes it the most cost-efficient answer to most problems that cost 2 or less. The second mode also makes it a good viable protection option if your opponent tries to destroy your resonators, as well as a good response for when they try to block an attack from a powered-up Piale. There isn't too much extra room for Kirik to work with after getting through his core resonators and spells, but you can mix and match quite easily based on the direction you want to take the deck in. I've made 3 lists to go along with this video. One is an aggressive Kirik that sides into Isis for the mirror. This one is similar to the list that was run at the New Frontiers format Worlds event. The second is a mid-range deck that's my personal preference. And the last is a gimmicky dragon build that relies heavily on a combo involving Epic Tail and Misty Dragon. It won't win you any major tournaments, but it's certainly funny to pull off the main combo. I'd go over each deck individually, but a lot of the combos and options here are shared between all of them. It's much easier to just talk about the certain card combinations and plays individually, rather than list out everything you can do in each deck. Let's start by going over Kirik's options now that New Valhalla has released. Shengong Bao is a particularly strong resonator with Kirik, since he can gain a boost off of Pig or Piggy. I keep his Tiger partner at 2 because Gong Bao can search him out, and also because the Tiger doesn't add too much to the deck on its own. In aggro, Kirik wants to be going fast, and Tiger doesn't have and cannot gain swiftness without outside help. Where things do get interesting are with its ability to give itself flying. This works with Majin Dark Elf, a 6/6 swiftness 1-cost resonator that can only be played if you've taken damage that turn. Tiger gives you an easy way to hurt yourself since its flying requirement forces you to take the damage. Majin Dark Elf also works well with Nullstone, one of the only remaining dual will sources in the cluster. It's also a huge option opener for Kirik. Beyond the Dark Elf combo, Nullstone also gives Kirik access to a handful of useful darkness spells and resonators. The most notable of these is Life-Severing Blade, a 3-cost removal spell that becomes a 1-cost spell if a resonator from your side of the field is sent to the graveyard that turn. This works really well with Hoel Pig since you can just banish Pig through its own effect and make the cost reduction live on Severing. Other worthwhile cards include things like Evil Elemental Uprising, which helps with Gil and Time-Spinning Witch matchups, Command of Life and Death, which is a decent revival option depending on your resonator base, and Wolf's Reign, which gives a somewhat gimmicky option for a game closer in an aggro deck. Since the Wolf tokens are beasts, they'll boost Gong Bao, but since they're removed from the game instead of being sent to the grave at the end of the turn, they won't trigger Severing. Ray is also a Darkness Beast, but I find him to be a bit of a trap. He's a very cost-efficient 2-drop since he automatically inverts into 0 at the start of your next main phase, but her protection ability can hurt you more than it helps. 0 will cancel out Piggy's ability to give flying or swiftness the first time you try, and will cause cards like High Speed or Play Dead to fizzle. If you really want a card with protection in Kirik, I recommend Earthquake Observer. It's a 3-cost 8/8 that gains a 2/2 boost and barrier anytime your opponent plays a chant. Only a few specific colors have non-targeting removal, so Explorer can be harder to deal with in a deck like Witch that relies on cheap field control chants to stall till they can get their combo off. He's also particularly decent in the mirror since the only way for another Kirik to kill him is by ramming into him with a boosted up Piale. Welser Resonator, in my opinion, is one of the best generic support cards Kirik has access to. His ability allows Kirik to abuse his power chant lineup even more, and he himself can be a potential game ender on turn 2 or 3. Welser comes with a 14/14 body, an ability that copies the first chant you play that turn, and he also has a one-time use God art that lets you put him into the field for 2 Fire Will instead of his normal 7 Will cost. He works particularly well with just about all of Kirik's battle arts, and can be an OTK machine by himself in some instances. Notable combos with Welser include searching 2 Piale or dealing 2000 damage on up to 2 entities, dealing 800 damage and gaining a 4/4 boost in swiftness through high speed, resulting in 2600 total, dealing 2,400 damage with Power Spike and potentially dealing lethal if you have a way to give Welser swiftness that turn for a total of 38 damage, giving something a 2,000 attack increase through Burning Awakening. The list goes on. The amount of combo and OTK decks you can build around Welser is as vast as the game's card pool. He makes a particularly good boss in Kirik thanks to his cheap cheat-in ability and from Kirik's wide range of abusable chance. Note that you don't have to pay the strength counter requirement for anything twice, so Awakening High Speed allows you to give up to 2 things swiftness and burn your opponent for 800 damage for only 4 counters. Kirik, in my opinion, is one of the best rulers of the format. He has difficult matchups, but his ability to brute force his way through those matchups as well as just grind out by burn allows him to adapt easily to a lot of situations. He can effectively play around other meta decks with the right pilot, and it's easy for him to capitalize on other players' inexperience. His cards are cheap enough that he can survive through time spinning, which is lockdown combo if it's not properly timed, and he also has one of the most cost-efficient answers to IU's OTK potential. He has the Destructive Force to deal with Chimimi and Hanzo's shenanigans effectively, and his ability to add an extra card to his hand each turn can outpace Lucifer, Lich, or Rhea's discard. Even during the Scheherazade meta, Kirik was still able to place in top 8 or top 16 at almost every event that featured him. Kirik is not without his faults, though. His one glaring weakness is additions, which Fire and Darkness both lack ways to remove. Cards like Lightning Cave can greatly hinder his aggressive Resonator base, and he really can't stop Witch from ramping with all of the Will statues or using Koga Village to continually blink her Resonators in and out. Eternal Tower is also a huge problem for him since most of his chant lineup is 1 cost. This can be worked around by a more aggressive Resonator-based deck, but a decent chunk of Kirik's main deck and chant lineup will still be rendered useless. He also doesn't do too well with hard removal. None of Kirik's Resonators come with built-in protection or replacement effects, and he doesn't have a real recovery option outside of Play Dead. Powerless Dragonoid can also be a problem, but not so much for the counter removal, but just because it's a 1-cost counter to about 40 to 50% of everything in Kirik's deck. All of this feels like a small price to pay for the rest of Kirik's benefits, though. Without at least one weakness, he'd probably have ended up banned or gutted after Lapis Cluster rotated out. Even now, his biggest issue is that most of his problems from Wind didn't leave with the rest of Lapis Cluster.